What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to go through some of the steps that I usually try to take when I repot rootbound nursery material. I've been helping out a number of students recently with rootbound nursery material, and it kind of runs the gamut from things that have been potted up but have really large roots because of field growing to things that are completely pot bound and extremely difficult to get out of containers. Now, if you've ever worked with this type of material, you know that it can be very labor intensive, difficult, and time consuming to repot just a tree such as this one. So this is in a 3-gallon can. Obviously the soil is very dense. It has a nice big trunk. I have no idea how long it's been in here, but I'm guessing it hasn't been repotted in at least 10 years. I'm using a Juniper because that is the best example that I have available right now, but the same techniques generally apply to a lot of different species of tree. I've seen old Japanese maples in these types of conditions. I've seen Japanese black pines and so on. So the process of extracting essentially the tree from the container and getting the roots cleaned up and then into some fresh soil is challenging, let's say. So there's a number of techniques that you can use if you don't have a lot of tools to get your tree out of the container. So pulling this out is not going to be possible, and using a regular root scythe along the sides is going to be difficult because the container is so deep. So just cutting down the side of the container in order to extract the tree can be really a pain in the butt, but it will be faster typically than trying to cut around. So if your tree is not in a plastic container, you could consider breaking the container. That's totally up to you. But in this case, after my attempts at cutting the container and actually damaging my scissors, then trying to pull it out and so on, I'm actually just going to resort to a little bit of power tools. Safety first with power tools. I'm going to use this electric reciprocating saw to cut through the entirety of the root ball and pot all at once so that I can quickly extract this. Now I've strapped it down to my table here, both to keep myself from having to otherwise stabilize it. If you have a second person, you can use that. Usually it's not too much of an issue. And just make sure you don't actually saw through your work table. Now, a few caveats to what I just did. With this particular plant, I could actually see where the nabari was, and so if I turn this sideways here, it is possible with nursery stock that the junction of the trunk and the roots could be way down in the container, and that I could have just sawed through the entire trunk, removing all of the roots by doing this. So before you do this, make sure that you know where the junction of the roots and the trunk is, because particularly with container stock that has not been specifically grown for bonsai, a lot of times the trunk is buried down in the pot. Now with the bottom of the root ball removed, I should be able to get this out of here a little bit easier. There we go. So because I know this material is pretty pot bound, the main goal of what I'm doing here today is just to create some more space for root growth. I'm going to try to take some portion of this root ball and clear out all of this old nursery soil, but if I can't do that because of the amount of wood that's under here, then I'll just go as far as I can. But I definitely want to remove all the circling roots that are on the outside, as well as clear out a little bit of space. I should mention, if you don't have a Sawzall reciprocating saw of some sort, you can try using a handsaw, or you can just do it all by hand, cutting the container open, as well as then raking out more of the bottom soil and cutting the roots by hand. If you prefer not to use metal objects to do root work, you can certainly attempt to do this with a chopstick. And I do that sometimes, and I alternate between root hooks and chopsticks, but I find that unless you unless you have a lot of practice at it, that chopsticks tend to be quite a bit slower, and I don't see any real advantage to it, especially with rough nursery stock of this type. I've already unearthed a fair amount of circling roots here, and I'm not going to cut all the roots off, but what I am doing is trying to remove roots that are going around in circles. So where I find roots that are snagging up my root hook or chopstick, I'll go ahead and sever them. And that means that I'm reducing the amount of usable fine roots that the tree has. Obviously, the timing for this operation should be during your local repotting window. So now, having gone around one time, I can see that pretty much the entire root ball is full of fine roots. So I'm going to go a little bit more aggressively. I'm going to clear off some more of the topsoil here to make sure that there's good air penetration into the root ball. So I just am noting that despite the fact that this has been outdoors in the rain for the last 12 hours, that there's actually dry spots here in the root ball. And that's part of what we're trying to correct as we move this into a bonsai pot and different types of soil. We want to ensure that there's good water and air penetration into every part of the root ball. All right, so I've sort of broken up the majority of that top crust and gotten down here to some slightly larger roots. I'm going to do a little bit more excavation here, but I think that where I'm headed is that I'm going to actually get the Sawzall back out and cut off another 30% of what's left here because there are so many roots up here. That's going to break this up a little bit more and save me a lot of work. So now you can really see that the underside of this is almost completely dry in the center, and that's a function of how dense that soil is. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to break up that bottom now. I'm going to tease a little bit of this out from between the root tips so that I can trim the root tips with a sharp scissor, and also then have them projecting slightly into the new soil that I'm going to put underneath here for the next year or two worth of growth. I have previously done this whole process by hand without using any power tools or anything, and I have to say that it takes about 5 times longer. So don't be shy about, if you're confident that the root ball has a good amount of fine fibrous roots like this one, then don't be shy about cutting off the bottom, assuming that you've also excavated and found the junction between the trunk and the majority of the roots. Okay, so with the majority of the root work done, I'm actually going to go ahead and stick this right back into a 3-gallon nursery can, just like it came out of. The reason is I've removed something like 2/3 of the root ball, so there's going to be plenty of space for the roots to run and reestablish themselves. And with this tree in particular, because it is an old tree and has been grown out, I had to cut it back significantly in order to bring the growth in tighter to the trunk. And I'm waiting for these branches to grow back out. And so the larger the container it is in for the next couple of years, the faster that growth is going to happen, and the sooner I'm going to get this into show shape. So putting it into a small container at this point would be counterproductive. It's possible because I could fit it into a much smaller container than it was in, but at this point I want that fast growth. So the root work that I've done is not going to be undone by using a large container again. This large container is going to give the tree lots of room to grow, and then I can come back and do additional root work to free up space closer in here to the trunk during the next repotting. Junipers are pretty tough, and I could probably go ahead and completely bare root this, but that also might slow it down. So I'd prefer to do the repotting in stages as well as to put it into that large nursery container. All right, so I've gone ahead and washed off the loose soil particles from the outside of the root ball here, and I'm going to go ahead and stick it into this container. I'm using my standard kind of nursery mix, which is a mix of perlite, cocoa coir, and I've added some bark in this case. And then I'm actually not even going to tie the tree in the container because it's got a relatively established root ball. I might regret that later, but all right, and with that, I'm done. Basically, I have given this some fresh soil and some room to grow, and I'm going to put it back out in my nursery grounds to get going again and hopefully see some nice shoots. Now, if you're wondering about the color on this, that is winter color on an Itoigawa. They are not all the same. Some of them tend to do this a little bit more than others, but I saw it do this last year and it went right back to a nice bright green in the spring. The aftercare here can be a little bit important in the sense that if you're doing your repot out of season or early in the repotting season, you need to make sure that you are protecting from freezing temperatures afterwards. Junipers are obviously very cold hardy, but you are better safe than sorry, particularly when you're dealing with older trees like this one. That wraps up this video. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.